بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله أما بعد Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh to all Muslims in the audience, and a very good afternoon to all Muslims in the audience, all the non-Muslims I should say. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank you all for coming to our fourth event of our Islam Awareness Week titled Jesus, Son of Mary. Our speaker today is Brother Abdul Green, who was, as you know, born a Christian and grew up in Egypt. Later on, he accepted Islam and now works at the Islamic Cultural Center at Regent's Park Mosque, clarifying misconceptions about Islam. So, without further ado, I'd like to hand over to the brother.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله. We begin by praising Allah, and we praise Him, and we seek His help, and we ask for His forgiveness, and we seek refuge with Allah from the evil of ourselves and from the evil consequence of our evil actions. Whomsoever Allah guides, there is none to misguide, and whomsoever Allah leaves to go astray, there is none to guide. And I testify that there is nothing worthy of worship except Allah, and that Muhammad is the messenger of Allah. I think that the way I've approached this topic about Jesus, the son of Mary, as the Quran often refers to Jesus as Ibn Maryam, the son of Mary. And I think the reason for that is to purposefully make a contrast and to make a contradiction to the claim that Jesus is the Son of God. Because one of the things that the Quran is very emphatic about and stresses this point on many different occasions, that Allah or God does not have a son. God does not have a daughter. God does not have children. God does not marry. He does not have a wife. God does not beget, nor is He begotten. That attributing such things to God is in fact a blasphemy and a type of very severe statement that really contradicts the greatness and the glory of God. Why is that the case? Because the belief that Muslims have about God, about the Creator, and this belief we believe is the same idea or the same concept of God that was taught by all prophets, including, we believe, Jesus. Muslims believe that Jesus was a prophet of God. He was a messenger of God, that he received revelation from God, and that he taught essentially the same message, the same religion, the same belief as every other prophet. And that religion and that belief system is, or can be generically referred to as Islam. The Quran talks about Islam as the universal religion of all of God's messengers. And the Quran refers to all of those messengers as being Muslim. They themselves were Muslim and their followers were Muslims. For some people this may be a cause of some confusion. And it is true as well, we have to make a point, we should mention that it is also true that we can use the word Islam to refer to two things. Even within the context of our epistemology, that we do refer to, we use the term Islam, okay? Sorry, I should turn my phone. Let's put this off. We do use this term Islam to refer to the Sharia, or the laws and guidance and the detailed instructions that were given to the Prophet Muhammad in the Quran, and that were expounded in his life and his teachings, which is also referred to as the Sunnah. And both of those are revelation. So we refer to that as Islam. But the term Islam is also applied to the universal religion that God revealed to every messenger. And that is because the meaning of the word Islam has a universal application. And the word Islam means submission. It's from the Arabic word istislam, which means to submit or to surrender. In simple terms, to give in. A Muslim is a person who makes Islam. This is just how Arabic is. A person who makes jihad is a mujahid. Yeah? A person who makes Islam is a Muslim. The essence of the word, the root of the word is the same. Islam. Muslim is the one who makes Islam. So a Muslim is someone who surrenders and submits themselves to the will of God. And therefore we believe that the religion of Adam, the religion of Noah, the religion of Abraham, the religion of Moses, the religion of all of the prophets who were sent to the children of Israel, including John the Baptist, including Jesus, and of course Muhammad, their religion was Islam. Because they all taught people to believe that there was one God, that there was one Creator who has created this universe and who has power and control over everything in this universe. And that this God and this Creator alone is worthy of worship. And that God is unique. That God is unique. The Quran tells us, لَيْسَ كَمِثْلِهِ شَيْءٍ. There is nothing that can be likened unto God. God is not like any created thing. And this is the fundamental teaching of monotheism. Monotheism, which we believe was the religion, as I've already mentioned, of Abraham, Moses, Jacob, Adam, Noah. They all believed that there was one God. And God, لَيْسَ كَمِثْلِهِ شَيْءٍ. There was nothing like unto God. God is not like a created thing. And this is fundamentally what distinguishes the religion of the prophets from the religion of the pagans and the idol worshippers. This is its fundamental distinction. That is why the Prophet Muhammad, may God's peace and blessings be upon him, in a particular incident, is quite important in terms of understanding the reality of monotheism. In one incident, there was one of his companions who had a slave girl who was looking after. She was a shepherdess, so he employed her or he used his slave girl to look after the sheep. And anyway, one day she lost one of the sheep, and he was so angry, he slapped her in the face. When he had done that, he felt so bad about what he had done, he wanted to recompense her and repent to God for what he had done. So he went to the Prophet Muhammad. He said, I did this and this and this. I want to set her free. I want to free her. So the Prophet said, bring her to me. And then he said to the slave girl, and he asked her two very important questions. He said, where is Allah? Where is God? Some people may think, what sort of question is that? Where is God? And the second question he said, and who am I? So when when the Prophet Muhammad asked, where is God? She said, fis sama, which literally means in the heavens, but it means also above the heavens. And who am I? She said, you are the messenger of God. And he said, she is a true believer, set her free. Now the point I want to make here is that the Prophet Muhammad was asking this question for a reason. He made this and he understood that what people believe about God is what distinguishes a person who truly believes in God and a person who is in fact a polytheist, or a person who makes partners and associates with God. And so at the heart of monotheism is the understanding that God is not a created thing. God is not a being that exists within the creation, that the creation is not God, and God is not part of the creation. This is the belief of the pantheist, of the polytheist. This is the belief of people who worship nature. They believe that God is everywhere and in everything. The tree is God, the sun is God, the moon is God, the stars are God. I am God, you are God. God is in everywhere, God is in everything. One of us may be more God than others. So maybe we could deify that person. Why? Because he's more godly. But ultimately, this idea that God is everywhere and in everything, and in fact, the creation and the Creator are one and the same. This is the essence of polytheism. This is the essence of those people who have a false belief about God. And that's why the Prophet Muhammad asked this very important question. So this understanding and this knowledge that the Creator is separate and distinct from the creation is at the very heart of the teaching of every prophet. And that's what they struggled against. They struggled against the polytheistic concept of worshipping idols, that somehow idols were endowed with some power, or that there were these gods that had control over things. And if we look to the history of the prophets, when we look to Noah, or we look to Abraham, or we look to Moses, and we look to Jesus, if we actually look to their history, we find that they had this universal struggle against this idea that something in the creation had any of the unique powers or the unique attributes or the unique qualities that only belong to God. Therefore to claim that a human being is equal with God is one of the most clear forms of idolatry, of polytheism, of making partners and making rivals with God. It contradicts the very essence of the message of the prophets. And of course, throughout history we find there are human beings who claim divinity for themselves. Alexander the Great. If you study the life of Alexander the Great, there was a time after he had conquered Egypt, he went to an oasis, which was particularly known as for an oracle. And he emerged from this oracle claiming that he was the begotten son of Zeus. Zeus being the chief god of the Greco-Roman world. He came out claiming that he was the son of Zeus, begotten son of Zeus. Pharaoh claimed to be a son of the gods and a god. And of course, for the Greeks and Romans, the idea of gods having sex and producing children, and either gods with goddesses or gods and goddesses with humans, that was all within their idea and their concept. And therefore these semi-divine beings, people like Achilles, was a demigod. Achilles was a demigod. His mother was a goddess, and his father was a human being. So he was a demigod. So this idea of gods having sons and daughters is a pagan concept. And this is the very idea, the very concept that the prophets were fighting, were resisting, were calling people away from. Because, of course, it is a lie against God. God is far removed from such things as having sons and daughters and having wives and so on and so forth. Because this is the very essence of paganism. Therefore, the idea that a prophet of God could claim divinity for himself is, of course, a contradiction in terms. By very definition of what a prophet is, the essence of the message of every messenger, of every prophet, as the Quran said, وَلَقَدْ بَعَثْنَا فِي كُلِّ أُمَّةٍ رَسُولًا أَن نَعْبُدُ اللَّهِ وَاجْتَنِبُوا الطَّاغُوتَ. That God sent to every nation a messenger, and this messenger would call the people to worship God alone and to reject the false gods. And to claim divinity for oneself is the greatest falsehood. There is no greater falsehood than that. Because human beings are temporary. Human beings are needy. Human beings come into existence and go out of existence. They are born, they eat food, they breathe air, they go to the toilet, they die. They are needy, they are temporary, they are mortal. So to equate such a limited thing with the unlimited, eternal, infinite Creator is of course the ultimate transgression, the ultimate lie against God, and the ultimate blasphemy. And therefore the Quran, in fact one of the reasons the Quran tells us, one of the purposes of the revelation of the Quran is to warn those people who say Allah has a son. To warn those people that who say God has a son. They have no knowledge of this. And the Quran says, without unequivocal terms, they do nothing but lie. That Allah is free and God is free from such a claim. In fact, the Quran tells us that the heavens are ready to rent asunder and the mountains are ready to crumble into ruin because of this saying that God has a son. This is the state of the universe. Why? Because of the severity of this blasphemy. So this is a very, very important aspect. That Muslims believe the message of the prophets was a consistent one. And that Jesus was a participator in that consistent message. In no way, shape or form did he contradict it. And therefore the Quran frees Jesus of those claims that people make about him, that he was God or that he was the Son of God, and so on and so forth. So therefore Jesus is seen to be as a great prophet of Islam, of that universal religion. That the way to God is by obedience to God, is by following God's commands, is by submitting to God's revelation. So we believe that this essentially consistent message was delivered by the prophets. O people, there is one God. God has no likeness. God is not like anything in this universe. God is distinct from this creation. And He alone is the one that you should worship. And the way that you should worship God is by obeying God's commandments. That God has given us guidance in life. How we should live. The things that we should do and the things that we should not do. And so the prophets came with this guidance. What differed from prophet to prophet was some of the details of that guidance. What differed from prophet to prophet was some of the details. Okay? The manner perhaps of praying, or the manner of fasting, or the amount that one needs to give in charity, or some of the things that were allowed and prohibited concerning food or alcohol or whatever it may be. So some of the details of this is what we call the Sharia, or this is the actual laws. Yes, those things changed or they varied somewhat from prophet to prophet. But the essential foundational belief and message, its essential principles, no. They certainly remained consistently the same. Now, when we read about the life of Jesus in the Quran, the first thing that we might notice, if we are familiar with the gospel stories, okay, I won't say the Christian tradition necessarily, because there are many different Christian traditions. It happens that, of course, the Trinitarian viewpoint that was adopted by the Council of Nicaea 345 years after Jesus, and that became forcefully established by the Roman emperors, this is the one that has come to dominate. But even today, we have the Coptic Church in Egypt, we have the Ethiopic Church, we have various churches in the Middle East. We have the clear distinction and difference between the Orthodox and the Catholic. And anyway, the point being, and even the Protestant, of course, and Catholic. So between these different churches, even the ones that exist, we have some doctrinal differences of a greater or lesser degree. It's interesting, for example, that in historical terms, until recently, the Coptic Church relied upon a different gospel than the so-called 4 synoptic gospels. They used to use the gospel of St. Thomas, which we maybe will come back to that in a little bit, just as a point of reference. But before the advent of Islam, there was an even wider variety of Christian churches and interpretations and beliefs concerning Jesus. But today the one that has come to dominate is what is often known as Pauline Christianity. It's often referred to as Pauline Christianity. So, the position of the Pauline Christianity, the idea of the Trinity, the idea of Jesus being God, of Jesus being the Son of God, and so on and so forth, and the description of the life of Jesus as you find it in the Synoptic Gospels. A person may read the Quran and say, well, it seems as if the Quran is talking about a different person. Because the story, even of the birth of Jesus in the Quran, is not the one that any Christian will be familiar with. Most Christians brought up in the West are familiar with the Nativity story. Mary and Joseph, there's a census that Herod is holding has to hold a census, and that Mary and Joseph are going to find somewhere to stay, and they get nowhere to stay, and they go to Bethlehem, and they just find a stable, and the angels come down, and the shepherds, and there's none of this in the Quran. No, in fact, Mary is living in the temple. Mary is living in the temple. And she has been given by her mother, who had dedicated Mary to the service of God, but when she was born, she said, oh, it's a woman. Because you couldn't dedicate a woman to the service of God. You could only dedicate men to the service of God. Anyway, she still ended up living in the temple, and then she was looked after Zachariah, who at the time was the high priest. And as the story of the Quran tells us, and here we have a meeting again. Now, we do find in various places the story does seem to meet with the Synoptic Gospels. But at that particular junction, there's no familiarity at all. It's almost like a completely different story. Where we do find a meeting is that two things that both the Quran agrees upon and the Synoptic Gospels agreed upon is that the angel Gabriel visits Mary and gives her glad tidings of a son. Now, as the Quran tells the story, Mary says, how can I have a son when no man has touched me? And the angel Gabriel says, that is easy for Allah. For God, He only needs to say be, and it is. This, by the way, is what is meant by the belief that the Muslims have that Jesus was a word from God. That Jesus was a word from God, meaning Jesus was created with the word of God, be. Kun. Meaning all that God needs to say is be. He just needs to say exist, and that thing will exist. This is the word, the command of Allah, and with God's command, Jesus was created miraculously. The fact that He had no earthly father does not mean that therefore His father be a heavenly father. No. In fact, the Quran refutes this particular theological argument very simply. And it says the similitude or the likeness of Jesus is that of Adam. God said to him, be, and he was. And it's a simple point. that Adam had no earthly mother or earthly father. And so, but that doesn't make him God or the Son of God. In the same way, because Jesus did not have a father does not mean therefore God is his father. No, the similitude of Jesus is that of Adam. God said to him, be, and he was. So therefore Jesus is a creature of God, a created being, a being that was brought into existence upon God's command. He is human, although of course created in a unique way, but still, like Adam was also created in a unique way, and Eve also was created in a unique way. Jesus was created in a unique way. So Mary, therefore, is the mother of Jesus, created miraculously. Now the Quran tells us that as Mary became heavy and pregnant with Jesus, she left the temple and she gave birth to Jesus underneath a palm tree. And the birth was painful, and after this birth she ate from some dates and she cooled herself with the water from the tree, and then she went back to the temple. And then the priests in the temple, they were so shocked. They were saying to Mary, "Oh Mary, your parents were not unrighteous people. What is this that you have come with a child?" And she doesn't know what to say. She could not respond to them. So she points to Jesus. She points to the baby. And Jesus speaks. And Jesus speaks. It is interesting that in fact there is a gospel account, but not in the Synoptic Gospels. It's called the Infancy Gospel. It's an apocrypha. Apocrypha, by the way, means hidden from the people. It doesn't mean that there is a necessarily historical or scientific basis to say that this particular gospel is not authentic, because Christianity never developed until recently a critical apparatus based upon scientific means for distinguishing an authentic text from a non-authentic text. If you read, for example, the Cambridge History of the Bible, then it makes very clear that the present Christian Bible, or the present Bible, the Synoptic Gospels and the Acts and so on and so forth, actually grew up along with church doctrine. So as the Trinitarian Pauline Church developed doctrine, it chose various texts that were in accord to that doctrine. But this, of course, is ignoring a vast collection of literature that existed, and some of those things, of course, did not agree with the Pauline version of Christianity. One of the interesting things you might like to research, you don't have to go far to do it, is you can go to the British Museum. And in the British Museum you can find the oldest biblical manuscript in existence, the oldest complete biblical manuscript. It's called the Codex Cyanoticus. And it was discovered, we could say discovered, rather like America was discovered, by the white man, discovered America. The fact that people were living there already, okay? But a man called Constantine Tischendorf, a man who was he lived in the 19th century. He was obsessed with trying to find a complete ancient manuscript of the Bible. So it's life's obsession. And eventually he went to St. Catherine's Monastery, and in St. Catherine's Monastery in Sinai, he found this ancient Bible that is dated approximately to about 350, 370 years after the time of Jesus. So this is the approximate date when it has been dated to. This is the oldest complete biblical manuscript. What is interesting, however, that it includes a gospel that is not in the present Bible. So when we say it's a complete biblical manuscript, it's actually not in agreement with the Bible that most people have in their hands today. And this gospel is the gospel of the shepherd Hermes. And this gospel is considered apocrypha. And the reason it's considered apocrypha is very simple. It is a pure tract about pure monotheism. It is a tract, read it. If you read it, you will see it is a tract of pure monotheism. There is no way that you could include this gospel and still believe in the Trinity at the same time. Because it clearly refutes the doctrine of the Trinity. And it clearly upholds the uniqueness of God, and that God is not like any created thing. This is what you could find in this gospel according to the Shepherd of Hermes, now of course not included in the biblical text. So the Apocrypha does not necessarily mean that it is not historically authentic. What it really means is that the church that became established, the Pauline church, did not consider that it agreed with their doctrine. So you can find the Infancy Gospel, again an Apocrypha, meaning hidden from the people for whatever reasons it was hidden, okay, that does narrate or does talk about Jesus talking in his infancy. And the Quran confirms this as a fact. Because one of the reasons why God revealed the Quran is to be Al-Furqan, so that the people of the book, the Jews and Christians, could know what is true and what is false from their religion. So Jesus speaks. So Mary, she doesn't know what to say. She speaks to Jesus. And Jesus at this stage says, and he explains that I am a prophet of God. I have been chosen by God. And that I am blessed. And so Jesus explains, and so they're amazed, of course, that this baby and this child is speaking. This is the first, of course, miracle that God performs through Jesus. Now the Quran acknowledges that Jesus did great miracles. He healed the lepers through God's permission. He gave sight to the blind through God's permission. He raised the dead through God's permission. And the Quran mentions also that he took some clay and made from this clay, as it were, the shape of a bird. And he breathed on it and the bird came alive. So this is not, obviously, you will not find this in the canonical Gospels. But again, this story is also present in some Apocrypha. The point me saying is that these stories in the Quran may not be familiar to every Christian, but it is available in the wider Christian tradition. Now, the main difference again, and the main area, apart from the things that I've mentioned, that Jesus is not the Son of God in any literal sense. And it may be worth dwelling just momentarily on this term Son of God. Because there is an acknowledgement that this term can be used in a very highly symbolic, non-literal sense. There is a recognition amongst Muslim scholars that this term could be used in a highly symbolic, non-literal sense. And there is some strong evidence that the term Son of God was used by the ancient Hebrews. But it clearly, and this is interesting because we, just a couple of weeks ago, we had an interfaith meeting with the Jewish Society in the London School of Economics, and this issue came up. And they confirmed what I was saying was true, is that this term, Son of God, does not have, and it is used in the Bible, in the Old Testament. For example, Israel is called the Son of God. Israel, you are my son, this day I have begotten you. In fact, David is called the Son of God. Ephraim is called the Son of God. So there are references in the Old Testament concerning others who are called sons of God. In fact, again in the New Testament, it's clear that Jesus seems to use this term broadly to apply to anyone who is really faithful and obedient to God. Blessed are the peacemakers, they shall be called sons of God. In fact, the famous Lord's Prayer is our Father, not just my Father, our Father. So this term Son of God seems, and certainly it's recognized by the experts in the language, not only Son of God, Son of Light, Son of Darkness. Jesus also refers to the rabbis and the scribes as sons of the devil. You are the sons of the devil, and your father, and he calls them liars, and you're the sons of the devil because your father is the father of lies, the devil. So he refers to the devil as being their father. Of course, it doesn't mean that literally that the devil begot them. This is a symbolic appellation. In Arabic, and by the way, and Hebrew and Aramaic are sister languages. Arabic, Hebrew and Aramaic, they are sister languages. They share common concepts and grammar, and some of the words are so strikingly similar, we'd actually understand what that person is saying. You can actually understand some Hebrew. If you speak Arabic, you can understand quite a few words in Hebrew. If you've ever been to a synagogue, you know that when they read the Torah, they have a little stick with a yad on it. Yeah? Now, of course, everyone who speaks Arabic knows that the Arabic word for hand is yad. Same. We say Assalamu alaikum, they say Shalom alaikum. Very, very similar. Okay? Now in Arabic, Arabs also use this term, but they're not the son of something, but they say the father of something. So for example, it's a nickname often that someone has given, father of this and father of that. Now a famous one from amongst the companions was one of the companions, his name was Abu Huraira, which means literally the father of the kitten. Now, does that mean that he went around fathering kittens? Literally? No. In Arabic, the reason he was given this term, Abu Huraira, means because he loved cats. He loved them, and because he loved them so much, they gave him this nickname, father of the cats. Okay? Of course, if anyone, therefore, went on to say, oh my God, look at those Muslims, they used to commit bestiality, right? And the proof is, there's this guy Abu Huraira, he went around fathering cats, we'd all say this is ridiculous, right? Okay? This is misunderstanding the language. And this, unfortunately, what happens, lost in translation. But hand this title over Son of God. Give that to the Greeks and the Romans, who, by the way, already believed that Zeus goes around having intercourse and having sons and daughters, and these gods of theirs go around having sons and daughters everywhere. Give that to people who don't understand monotheism properly anyway, and it's very easy to see how you develop this idea of some human being really being God's son. Because the foundational belief about God is corrupt from the very beginning. And this is why you find some modern scholars and researchers into comparative religion, for example, you could read the book, Ninian Smart's book called World Religions. It's quite widely available. He actually refers to Christianity as almost a type of pagan cult. Now, I don't think that's fair, because I don't think Christianity is really pagan. But the point that he is making, it's not so much that Christianity monotheized the Western world. It's more like the Western world paganized the teachings of Jesus. And so what you have is this amalgamation of some aspects of monotheism, but also some ideas of paganism. And in fact, this is what the Quran says, that in saying or believing that Jesus is literally the Son of God, they imitated what the pagans of old said, what the pagans before used to say. So this is concerning this term and the use of this term, Son of God. Admittedly, you can find it, but it has this purely symbolic meaning. But the main difference, again, apart from what I've mentioned, between the Quranic narrative and the biblical tradition is concerning the crucifixion of Jesus. Now, I will have to admit that if we look to even non-Christian secular historians, most of them say there's one thing we know for sure about Jesus, is that he was crucified. So how extraordinary that the Quran is denying that. And the Quran says that Jesus was not crucified. They did not kill him, nor did they crucify him. But the Quran does say how it appeared to them as if that had happened. So, therefore, no doubt, the appearance, or it seemed to some people, that Jesus had been crucified. However, the Quran clarifies that Jesus was not crucified, nor was he killed, but Allah, or God, raised Jesus up to himself. And as a side point, Muslims believe, Orthodox Muslims who belong to Ahl al-Sunnah wal Jama'ah, the people of the Prophet's Sunnah, and the congregation, or the Jama'ah, or the community of the Muslims, their aqidah, or their belief is that Jesus will descend in the last days, and that his hands will be resting on the shoulders of two angels, and he will descend in a white minaret in Damascus, and he will fight the Masih al-Dajjal, which means the anointed liar, or the Antichrist. And he will fight the Antichrist, and he will break the cross, and kill the swine, and abolish the jizya. And that after he has defeated the Antichrist and the army of the Antichrist, then he will rule on the earth as a just ruler for 40 years. And this will be the best time ever there has ever been on this earth. And there will be only one religion, and that is the religion of God, the religion of Islam. Okay? And after that, a man called Dhul Sawal Katain, which means the one with the two skinny ankles, right? He will come from Abyssinia, and he will come to raid the Kaaba and the Mecca and to take its treasures, and Jesus will go with his army to meet him, and then Allah, or God, will send a breeze that will take the soul of every person who has an atom's worth of faith, even if they are in caves. And only the worst people will be left upon the face of the earth, and the day of judgment will come upon them. Okay? So we believe that Jesus will come at the end of time. This is important. Why? Because every Jew knows that there is no way Jesus could be the Messiah. They know it. And they laugh at the Christians. Why? Because the Christians say that Jesus was crucified. And as far as they're concerned, that's enough to prove that he can't be the Messiah. Because if he was crucified, he can't be the Messiah. Because every Jew knows that the Messiah is victorious, and that he will establish God's kingdom on the earth. And that it is impossible that the Messiah could be crucified. In fact, there are some other theological reasons, I don't have time to go into it, okay, why also they could say, and Paul admits it's a sticking point for the Jews. It's a sticking point for the Jews on the issue of Jesus' crucifixion. There's a quickly side point. Amongst the Jews, they believe this idea that a man who is hung on a tree is cursed. So how could God curse his chosen Messiah who's hung on a tree? It doesn't mean, it's nonsensical. However, the truth is that he was not crucified, and he was not killed, that God rescued him, and God will, and he will fulfill his role as the Messiah, as has been prophesied, and as has been told. And he will come, and he will establish God's kingdom on the earth, as I narrated that. And this is why, by the way, when Jesus returns, there will be no excuse accepted from a Jew or a Christian. Maybe today we live in some type of confusion, and a person, we could say they have some shubha, they have an excuse for some doubts. They have an excuse for some doubts. A Jew will have an excuse to have some doubts, and a Christian also will have some excuse to have some doubts for some reasons. Okay? But when Jesus actually returns, there will be no excuse. There will be no excuse for doubts then. Okay? Because the matter about which they will dispute it will become clear. Okay? So, this is the issue that Jesus was not killed and he was not crucified, although that was something that appeared to them. Okay? Of course, very briefly, from a theological point of view, salvation, we do not believe, comes from believing that God sacrificed anybody on a cross. 2 points that are very important. Our creed does not acknowledge original sin. We do not believe that human beings are born sinful and that there is original sin. In fact, our religion teaches us that every child is born upon the fitrah, That means they are naturally inclined to worship God. It is only their environment that turns them away from that and makes them a Jew or a Christian or a fire worshipper. But if a child was left upon their nature, then they would worship only God. So we believe that children are born pure. They are born sinless. Sin, by definition, means a purposeful choice to disobey God. To sin, you have to choose to disobey God. And that's why children are not accountable until they reach the age of, until they have their aql, until they, what's the term in Arabic we use for someone who reaches the age of accountability? Bulugh? Is that it? No. Anyway, I've forgotten now. I'll look it up. Okay? They say when someone becomes... Anyway. But when someone reaches that age, it means they have now the ability to distinguish. Only then are we actually accountable. Only then the angels begin to write the good deeds and the bad deeds. Okay? So if there is no original sin, then the idea that a sacrifice needs to be made, or that God or the Son of God needs to be sacrificed in order to forgive, or for God to be able to give sins, it does not even come into play. It doesn't even exist, because the idea of original sin is not there. We don't believe that God punishes all human beings for what Adam and Eve did. Adam and Eve made a mistake. They had to face it. Okay? We don't believe that God therefore put a burden on everybody else through which some sacrifice has to be made to release us from it. No. We believe that the way to get close to God is by acknowledging God, worshipping God alone, following God's divinely revealed commandments, and that if we sin and we make a mistake, we turn to God, we recognize our mistake, we ask God for forgiveness, and if we are sincere in our repentance, then God will most certainly forgive us. Okay, so I did have a few more little points that I wanted to mention. Okay, just one point that I would like to, and it will only take me a few minutes, but I think it is worth mentioning just as a point. I said that I might go back to the Gospel of Thomas. It's connected with the idea of crucifixion, because Paul, of course, he makes a very important point that his gospel, the gospel of Paul, and he does call it himself, my gospel, his gospel. He refers to his own gospel, his own message that he claims that he has got from Jesus, is he says, I preach, or we preach, Christ crucified. First of all, it indicates there that people had different ideas about Christ, about Jesus, about the Messiah. But his concept was of Christ crucified. In other words, for him, the essence of the message of Jesus is about his crucifixion. And that through his death and through his crucifixion and believing in this sacrifice, human beings get salvation. This is the essence of the Pauline teaching of Christianity. Okay? However, what is very interesting for me, really interesting, okay, are two things. Number one, the Gospel of Thomas. The Gospel of Thomas has a very interesting feature about it. And the interesting feature is that it is what they call a sayings gospel. In other words, all you will find in the Gospel of Thomas are things Jesus said. Jesus said this, and Jesus said that, he said this, and he said that. Nothing about what happened to Jesus. Nothing about his crucifixion. It's about Jesus' sayings. And what becomes more interesting is that modern biblical scholarship has tried to analyze common threads between Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And when they did that, they found that these Gospels could be traced back to a common thread. In other words, they all had a common thread. They all repeated certain things. And it's interesting that when they took those things that were repeated, what they came out with is what is called in German Quell, which means source. What they came up is also known as Q. If you do your research onto it and you look at Q or Quell, what they believe is the source gospel, it's very interesting that the source gospel, in other words, the one that they believed that they all borrowed from, was actually a sayings gospel. In other words, there was nothing in that except things that Jesus said. Like, for example, the Sermon on the Mount. Blessed are the meek, and blessed are the peacemakers, and blessed are those who seek justice, and this beautiful sermon that Jesus gave. So they are also, and what is significant about that? It's very significant indeed, because what it illustrates is true, is that the original teachings of Jesus were teachings about how to live, about how to treat your fellow human beings. It was not, therefore, a gospel of crucifixion and belief in the death and resurrection of Jesus. It was a gospel about teaching human beings how to live, about how they should live in accordance to God's commandments. And that, of course, indicates that, therefore, this preaching of Christ crucified really is a different gospel. That the original teaching of Jesus is what, of course, the Quran claims it to be. And anyway, of course, Muslims would say that because we believe the Quran is from God. That Jesus was preaching the message of believing in one God and submitting to His divinely revealed commandments. So I've really been very, I sort of cut it down to its essentials. This is really very briefly what Muslims believe about Jesus, the Son of Mary, and may God guide all of us closer to the truth. Thank you very much for taking the time to come and listen to what we have to say. And if I said anything to offend anyone, I apologize for that. It's not my intention to be offensive at all. I hope just trying to explain everything in the best way. That was my intention. So forgive me if anyone got offended by what I said. Thank you very much.